All right, everybody. Great to see everybody here. It's roll-up day, and roll-ups mean we can blast events on chain, which is awesome. And I'm kind of assuming, obviously we're in progress with this now, but things are starting to work. What comes after we finally scale cryptocurrencies? I think it's crypto communities, and then especially the crypto country, the network state. And so that's what I've been asked to talk about today. We've started new currencies. Can we start new countries? So this is, it's roll-up day, but then after roll-ups, what do you do with the technology? Well, I think we can build very strong, powerful online communities that have the capabilities, as I'll get to, of things that are comparable to nation states. We call them network states. We have actually a conference on this, by the way, later this year, Singapore, September 22nd. Armstrong, Vitalik, Anatoly, a bunch of other folks will be talking there. Brian Johnson, Huberman, me and Neville. So come by, and all the startup societies will be there. So that'll be right after Token 24/9 if you're in town. Okay. So without further ado, starting new countries is possible, but why now and what next? So first, why is starting new countries possible? So I wrote a book on this. You can look at it, and it's version 1.0. It's up there. I argue starting new countries is possible, preferable, and profitable. So let's go with the first, possible, right? Are new countries even possible? So we know that new companies exist. There's Google, right? There's new communities, namely Facebook, and new currencies like Bitcoin start off a message board. And these came from very, very modest beginnings, a garage, a dorm room, a message board. Could we similarly have these gigantic things start from modest beginnings, but not a company, a community currency? Could we have a country? That's a concept of the network state. And what is a network state? Here's a visual. It is if Bitcoin is a decentralized currency, a network state is a decentralized country. And so it's a physical social network with nodes around the world, and the population and income and real estate footprint of such a decentralized country is comparable to that of a legacy nation state. And the people are everywhere, but their hearts are in one place, okay? So this is what a million-person network state looks like. It's actually a concrete thing. Now, how would we get to 1 million, though? So we have a population of 1, and then 17, and then 172. So like a single founder, just like Zuck, starts, let's say, in Tokyo, and they start recruiting people around the world. They do co-living, okay? And eventually, they start getting to on the order of 1,000 people with several hundred-person groups around the world. Then like 17,000, then 170,000, and eventually 1.729 million. And the individual towns over here can actually be full real estate build-outs. 22,000 units is actually quite a lot of units. And if you have 100 of those, you actually have something that has a scale that is comparable to that of a legacy nation state. And now that number of 1 million, why does that put us within country range? Why is that a magic number? Well, most countries are actually small countries. The majority of UN members actually have less than 10 million citizens. Very few countries are big countries like the US and Russia, Brazil, China. Most of them are small countries. And in fact, 38 of them have less than 1 million in population. So just get to 1 million, you're actually already within striking distance. That's one argument. The second argument for why 1 million is not just possible, but new countries are possible, is that actually the number of countries has quadrupled over the last 70 years. This is not how we normally think about the world, but there were about 50 UN member countries, if you define a country as a UN member, around 1945, and almost near 200 by 2010. And the reason for this is the breakdown of various empires, as we'll get to. But the point is new countries have been started. And the third point is that cryptocurrencies now rank with fiat currencies. At the time of the screenshot, Bitcoin was somewhere between the Turkish lira and the Chilean peso in terms of its market cap. And so you put those together, and maybe crypto countries could rank with fiat countries. And you take now not coin market cap, but nation real estate pop. And here a network state with 1,729,314 people would be somewhere between Latvia and Bahrain, which would be a real country at the Olympics with a flag and everything potentially. But it's global and decentralized, where all these others are located to a region. That's the key trick. That's the key new thing we're doing. We're starting to have networks rank alongside nations, just like cryptocurrencies rank alongside fiat countries, fiat currencies. So that's the argument at a high level for why network states are possible. That dashboard over here maps to a ranking in a fiat country dashboard. And the thing is, if you have sufficient traction and scale, you can get diplomatic recognition. And we know this because we've already seen sovereigns ink deals with companies and cryptocurrencies. The land is already negotiating with the cloud. For example, Tuvalu did deal with GoDaddy for the .tv domain, and Nevada did deal with Tesla for the Gigafactory. El Salvador has adopted Bitcoin as its national currency. And these examples can be multiplied. So a crypto community could do a deal with a country for land or for a special economic zone. That's the idea of the network state. Now, that's why we talked about starting new countries as possible. Now let's talk about why they're preferable. So why are new countries preferable? There's both a push and a pull. The push is from people in failed states. So in Venezuela, in Panama, in Sri Lanka, these are countries that have powerless people and they want an alternative to failed states. On the other side, ambitious people now have an alternative in the form of frontier societies. So essentially, the same drive that made people, leave Africa and go to America and even land on the moon, that's the power users who want to push frontier societies. And that's the same U-shaped coalition as crypto itself, where it's the people who are just trying to hang on to a bank account and the people who are trying to push the limits of what a bank account even is. And sometimes those are even the same person. That's why they're preferable. And third, why are they profitable? So if you take the ARPU of nation states, social networks, and network states and put them on the same chart, so the axis here is the number of people. So it's a log scale, 100 million, a billion. The axis here is annual revenue per user per capita. Okay. So that's also a log scale. This is in the tens of dollars, thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars. So the social networks are over here. That's Meta, WeChat, TikTok, LinkedIn, et cetera. So they're something where they're in the hundreds of millions or even billions of people, but their revenue per user per year is in the tens of dollars. Like maybe you make $40 in ad revenue per year per person, but across 3 billion people, that's $120 billion. Very legit business, but their dollars per person are not that much. On the other hand, you have the nation states, which are up over here. That's like Estonia, Singapore, right? They have on the order of 1 to 5 million people, but their monetization per person in terms of tax revenue per capita is in the tens of thousands of dollars per year. Then you have out over here the two superpowers, the US and China, and they have hundreds of millions or even a billion plus people and tens of thousands, thousands or tens of thousands of dollars per person per year. That's why they're sort of Pareto optimal in terms of scale and money. These are that's why people, it's satisfying when your chart recapitulates things that are on the Pareto optimal frontier. And then finally, over here would be the network states. So these are in the order of 1 to 5, 1 to 10 million people, and their monetization per person per year would be on the order of hundreds to thousands of dollars. I think of it as a new SaaS, society as a service. Okay, ha ha ha. And everything you're doing in terms of roll-ups and so on enables this because things just go on chain by default. The tax of putting something on chain and having it be settled, well, that goes away when transaction fees drop to fractions of a cent. So everything you're doing is enabling crypto countries to form. And so these can start over here, but of course they can expand. There's no upper limit to the population or income of a network state. So that's why starting new countries is possible. But why now? So now I'm going to get into some stuff which is basically history and just the context of the moment. It is, very different than the technology we typically talk about, but I think it's important to figure out why now. So why now? Because history is running in reverse. And first, what do I even mean by that? Well, many phenomena are happening, many events are happening today that happen in reverse relative to the past. For example, in 1890, the Western frontier closed. In 1991, the internet frontier opened. The NSF acceptable use policy was repealed and commercial traffic was allowed on the internet. That began the hypergrowth of the internet. Back then, you had Spanish flu and it was heavily censored. Today we have we just had COVID-19 and that was heavily covered. Back then you had the captains of industry, the robber barons, they lost their fortunes. Today you have the tech founders, they've built completely new fortunes. Back then, the journalists beat the founders. People like Ida Tarbell took down Rockefeller, they demagogued them, demonized them. Now today, it's going the other way around. The founders are being the journalists, ha ha ha. Back then you had, for example, the New York Times allying with Stalinist Russia to starve Ukraine. So Walter Duranty, New York Times columnist, basically ran a bunch of fake articles that helped Stalin starve millions of Ukrainians to death, and actually also helped the Soviet Union under Stalin gain recognition from the USA. The New York Times' false articles are why the Soviet Union basically exists. It got recognition from the US, and it got money and all these subsidies to keep it going. Today, the New York Times has switched sides. Now it's on the side of Ukraine versus Russia, which is, it's a little questionable given that they were on the other side. They're the reason that Ukraine even has a problem with Russia. Back then, America shipped goods to China. That's an old cartoon of Uncle Sam laden with goods going to a stereotypical Chinese man. And it says, wanted like 10 million bridges, 5 million roads, that kind of thing. And so Uncle Sam in the late 1800s, it's like 1901, Uncle Sam was portrayed as the goods manufacturer and China as the market. Today, it's exactly the reverse. China is the goods manufacturer and Uncle Sam is the market. The trade imbalance is hundreds of billions of dollars per year. Back then, Russia was a senior partner to China. And today, China is a senior partner to Russia. Xi is, number one, and Putin is number two. Back then, you had a British ancestry guy running India. Until recently, you had an Indian ancestry guy running Britain. That's a reversal. And so we can see history running in reverse quantitatively as well. Basically, you see a lot of these U-curves. When you start looking at graphs and charts, start looking for these U-curves, you start seeing them pop up in a lot of places. This is one of the most important. For thousands of years, GDP was basically in Eurasia in terms of the geocenter of world GDP. So that's like the average of China and India and the Middle East and so on and so forth, and Europe. And then after the Industrial Revolution, it rocketed out to the West. And so it was here for thousands of years, and over hundreds of years, it rocketed out to the West. And the peak Westernization was 1950. And then since then, it's come back to the East even faster than it came. And so all of our discussion about the 1940s and Build Back Better or Make America Great Again, all of that kind of discussion is based on a time that was just incredibly atypical in human history. It's not like a stable state. It's like a inverted pendulum or a ball perched on top of a hill. This was never going to remain this way. It was a very unusual world state. And so that is now reversing. History's running in reverse. The non-West is dominating GDP. This is the origin of the multipolar world. Back then, you had basically taxation rise until 90% marginal tax rates mid-century and then fall. And so it's overall kind of like a U-curve. And then conversely, the concentration of fortunes also shows a U-curve. And this is usually portrayed negatively as, quote, inequality. But another way of putting it is power equality has risen because now you can have an individual actually stand up against government. So, Stalin killed all the millionaires and billionaires of the day. FDR just seized a bunch of their fortunes, nationalized their companies. But now today, someone like Elon or someone like Zuck can stand up to a government. And so now you have actually a multipolar world, someone like, someone who can found a cryptocurrency and that can stand up to a government. So wealth is going back to individuals and away from the state. That's how it actually used to be before the giant centralized states of the 20th century. It means many more decision makers, less concentration of power, actually. So it's in a sense, it's equality. Back then, America was 10x Chinese steel production. So here's the US, and that little sliver of red is China. Today, China is 10x American steel production. China makes more steel than the rest of the world. Back then, America was ideologically unified. Today, America is ideologically disintegrating. This shows congressmen voting together in the 1950s and then voting on straight partisan lines by 2011. And that's not just true at the level of Congress, it's true at the level of social networks. This is a totally different data set of Twitter from 2017. Blue and red had already separated. And by 2024, they're in completely separate social networks where blues are on Blue Sky and Mastodon and Threads, and reds are on Gab and Parler and Truth Social. And so what that means is they're not even like coming apart. They've come apart. There's already been a digital fracturing where people are in their own cognitive sets. That hasn't yet been printed out in the physical world, but it will be. So that means we're going to see new countries. So that's the historical and social context that gives a long argument for why things are running in reverse. And in particular, why is the running in reverse part so important? Well, if you remember this graph from a little bit earlier at the beginning of the talk, we showed the number of new countries arising. And we saw that it went from 50 UN members to like 200. But if you guys know like math, like how to do the analytic extension, what does this graph look like if you go backwards and forwards in time, what did it look like in the past? Was this really, year zero? Well, actually, if you go back, first, if we go forward a little bit, why did this even happen? You had the breakdown of the British Empire, you had the breakdown of the French Empire, and you had the breakdown of the Soviet Empire. And that's what led to all of these new countries. Okay, so it's the breakdown of these empires. But if you go backwards in time, those empires didn't exist. And so if you go backwards, what does it look like? It actually looks like this. Why? Because this is what Germany looked like before Bismarck. And this is what India looked like before the Indian Union state was formed. And if you zoom in, this is like a fractal piece of India. So if you go backwards in time, that's what the map of the world looked like. It wasn't built off a map. The entire nation state concept of lines on the globe that are cut into pieces, the world was not organized on the basis of, quote, geography. It was organized on the basis of community. That's how it used to be. Okay, we didn't have great maps of the world. People didn't fight over borders in the same way. They still fought, but they fought over community membership and other kinds of things. Borders were not enforced in the same way because you didn't even know necessarily where a border was before modern surveying tools. That's all relatively new stuff the last several hundred years. So if you go backwards in time, this is what the world looks like in the physical world, but in a sense, in the digital world, the community world, it made sense because communities lived together with each other. So there was a legibility to this where people near each other on the map spoke the same language, had the same culture. So point is, if you go backwards in time, the number of independent jurisdictions radically rises. How many are there here? I don't know, but it's definitely more than like 200 just with, Germany and India. And the conclusion is, that's surprising. That's, more independent states as we go backwards in time. 1950 was peak centralization. Well, what's happening now? So back then you can think of it as being a decentralized world. It got highly centralized in mid-century where you had one telephone company and two superpowers and 3 TV stations. It was like the Soviet Union and the USSR. Very, very, very unusual time in world history. Like it's never been that centralized. And since then, thanks to tech and politics, we've re-decentralized. And so there's the technological aspect of that where you go from centralized mass production and everybody in a factory to the smartphone in the palm of your hand. That's technological re-decentralization. But you also have political re-decentralization where you started with the unified US of the mid-20th century, and now you have the digitally and socially fragmented US of 2024. So that's why history is running in reverse. That's why new countries, that's a theoretical argument why new countries should not just be possible, but should explode. And one way of thinking about this is we aren't done re-decentralizing. I think the graph is going to look like this. This is actually what the graph of new currencies looks like, by the way, but staggered back a bit. That's to say there weren't many new currencies, but then starting in like 2009, obviously Bitcoin arose, then Ethereum, Solana, and depending on how you count, there's on the order of dozens of new currencies, cryptocurrencies that are on par with fiat currencies. And so my view is the breakdown of empire and the origin of the acknowledgement of the multipolar world to come is going to lead to just absolutely vertical re-decentralization. And the world is multipolar. Now, will that multipolarity drag the world into chaos? Well, this is a quote from the president of Kazakhstan. If the right of nations to self-determination was realized in reality or on the entire globe, over 600 states which would emerge on Earth instead of 183, of course, it would be chaos. And he was saying this in the context of lots of people are asserting this now. Example, the Catalonians, example, the Kurds, example, many different groups around the world want their own state, right? And so hundreds of states would emerge instead of 193. Of course, that would be chaos. Now, that's potentially what's going to happen. Maybe we can have order out of that chaos instead. Maybe he's right, but we can forge order. Maybe that's what's next. Maybe that's actually the technology all you guys are developing. It will allow, because it'll allow for lots of things to be put on chain and people to reestablish trust, reestablish communities, even when remote. So what's next? So I wrote the book in 2022. There's now been several gatherings like Zuzulu and Vitalia, Network State Conference, that are showing that we can take these online communities, script communities, and materialize them in person. There's now a movement here, which is, sorry, can you guys hear me? Did that break up?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I just heard a beep. Okay. So there's now a movement here where there's There's projects on Gitcoin to do many new Zuzlus. We've got a dashboard of network state projects. There's the network state camp. So we're turning this into a movement. It's still early, of course, but we start new companies, we start new communities, we start new currencies, can we start new countries? And, check, question mark. Thank you. That's at thenetworkstate.com, and come to Singapore on September 22nd. So networkstate.com/conference.
Thank you very much.